Okay. Okay. Good morning and thanks everyone for being here. Today I'd like to talk about the brain, more specifically a few of the myths and some interesting facts that I found out. Did you know that the brain's memory capacity is estimated to be 2.5 million gigabytes? Put that in perspective, that's about 12,000 smartphones or 3 million hours of television shows. That is a lot of TV. This fact was one of the many I came across during my research, and it's while doing my research that I realized how little, in fact, I actually knew about the brain. And it's not just me. I found that the average person knows very little about the brain, and what they do know at times is incorrect or even a myth. That's why I've chosen this topic. I've done some extensive research. Hopefully I can help inform all of you here today and those watching. For my research, I've chosen 3 myths and 2 interesting facts to talk about today. Myth number 1, bigger is better. Myth number 2, we only use about 10% of our brains. And myth number 3, that alcohol kills brain cells. And the 2 interesting facts that we're going to talk about today. Fact number 1, your brain feels no pain. And fact number 2, there are 100,000 miles of blood vessels in the brain. Well, I've already mentioned one interesting fact about the brain's memory capacity, but before we talk about more facts, let's dispel a few of those myths. Myth number 1, bigger is better. This is a widely accepted myth, but it's just not the case. An article I found on relativeandinteresting.com shows that a whale's brain, for example, is 6 times larger than ours, but its cognitive abilities, the ability to think, remember, are much weaker than ours. Another example of bigger is not always better is while men's brains, for the most part, are larger in size than women's, that doesn't necessarily that men are more intelligent. This is easily disproven, as you all know, when you meet me, and then you meet my much smarter wife. Speaking of intelligence, brings me to my second myth, that we only use 10% of our brains. This myth dates back over 100 years, although in an article of Popular Science about brain myths, they mention brain scans that show that we use every part of our brain, although not all at the same time. It's also why if there's damage to the brain, such as a stroke, it usually only affects one aspect of the brain, whether it be mentally or physically, but usually not both aspects. And the third and final myth I'd like to clear up is that alcohol kills brain cells. Moderate alcohol intake doesn't kill or even harm brain cells for that matter. That doesn't mean that alcohol can't damage the brain though. Alcoholics can experience brain damage related to drinking, but it's not because alcohol kills brains. In a Brain HQ article that I read, there are a few things that were described when people drink a lot of alcohol over a long period of time. While it can't kill brain cells, it can damage the dendrites, which are branch-like ends of the brain cells. These branch-like ends pass neurons back and forth, or messages. So as you can tell, that any damage to these can cause serious problems. Now with some myths dispelled, I'd like to talk a few more about the interesting facts that I've done. Fact number 1, your brain feels no pain. There are no nerve registers in the brain itself. Because of this, neurosurgeons can probe the brain while a patient is fully conscious. Doesn't that sound like fun? You might be thinking, well, what about headaches? Headaches are a different story. In a brainfacts.org article that I read, it says that there are receptors in a layer of tissue that serve as a protective shield between the brain and the skull. This tissue is affected by certain chemicals released from the brain cells that are nearby, thus resulting in headaches. And fact number 2, there are 100,000 miles of the brain cell. There are 100,000 miles of blood vessels in the brain. What's a blood vessel, you might ask? Well, after looking up, I found it's very similar to an artery in that it's a tube-shaped structure that brings blood and oxygen to tissues and organs. This looks similar to everything in red here. These are all the blood vessels that are in the brain. To put that 100,000 mile distance into perspective, if you took all of these blood vessels and strung them out, it would circle the world 4 times. What I also found interesting is that these blood vessels not only supply blood and oxygen to the brain, but it also supplies blood and oxygen to the scalp and to the face. And if there's a decrease in any of that blood flow, could result in numbness, weakness, or paralysis. So in conclusion, let's review the points as I talked about, because repetition helps the brain to remember long term. Myth number 1, bigger does not always mean better or smarter. Myth number 2, we use all of our brains, not just 10%. And myth number 3, moderate drinking of alcohol does not kill brain cells. In the 2 facts that I've talked about today, the brain feels no pain. Myth number 2, there are a whopping 100,000 miles of blood vessels in the brain. For those of you who, like me, knew very little about the brain or even myths, hopefully this speech has helped change that. So, that's it. Thanks.
Woo!
Good job. Good job.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks,
That's
guys.
that.